Finally, we come to Chapter 7, the last chapter in this textbook that we're using. And it's a shorter chapter. I'm just going to do 2 videos to cover some of the ideas I want to talk about. And it's based on 18 popular ideas about language learning that we either support or don't support based on a lot of the research we've talked about. And the first one being that languages are learned mainly through imitation, and kind of the importance of imitation, which in ESL we like to have students repeat after me and pronounce this. I think students like to do that, and sometimes I like to have students actually repeat the correct pronunciation. It's kind of like a false sense of learning that feeling like somehow by repeating it they're getting closer. I think they are. I mean, the muscles in your mouth. But it is frustrating to try to get rid of your accent. And as far as children, they don't imitate, what they hear a lot. They do some imitation, but they don't imitate a lot. And when people truly learn a second language, it's not really based on imitating a lot, but it's more based on understanding the language and having a chance to use it, the things that we've talked about. And it can kind of be proven because whenever a child or a second language learner comes up with an original sentence, the example from the book, like if a child says, "I'm hicking up," instead of "I'm hiccuping," if they say like "I'm hicking up," they've never actually heard that, but they're producing it because they're putting together sort of hiccup with an ing morpheme, and so that shows that they're creating really the language themselves. And even if someone says like the cowboy rided into town instead of rode, again, that they've never heard that before. Or even like the man that I spoke to him is angry, kind of adding that pronoun him again. It comes from someone trying to well, it could be from their first language too, like maybe in their first language you would say the man, like a lot of our students will say like the man, he's angry. And in their language they actually do that. They actually say the noun and then they also repeat it with the pronoun. But basically we don't see imitation as being one of the keys to actually learning a second language. And okay, and then the second point, that in terms of correcting students who are learning language, we might think that parents correct their children a lot and point out their grammatical mistakes, point out the wrong word usage, and that this is important in child language acquisition or in second language acquisition as well, because obviously we spend a lot of time correcting our students, modeling the correct way, helping them identify, why they're making that mistake, and especially in writing, we're constantly editing their writing, identifying their mistakes, getting them to work on it, and as speaking as well. But again, we don't see parents making a lot of grammatical corrections with their kids. Sometimes they'll tell their kid something that's rude that they said, inappropriate language, like if they say, like, give me that, and we'll say, you should say, please give me that, or may I have that, please. And or if they say, as they get near school age, they say like, Johnny and me are going to do this, Johnny and me, they'll say, no, Johnny and I. But when they're young, there aren't a lot of those grammatical corrections. Or if a child uses the wrong word, and like if a child says like, the car or my bike has a flat wheel instead of a flat tire, then we'll say, no, you don't say flat wheel, say flat tire, So focusing more on meaning, we'll make some corrections, but not a lot of grammatical corrections. And adults can make grammatical mistakes for years and years when they immigrate somewhere. So we usually refer to that as fossilization, because we feel like they're just surviving, they're trying to communicate, they haven't had a chance, to go to classes a lot. And so they just will say these same grammatical errors like, he, not, no, never, they'll say double negatives and things. And I guess we could say that maybe if that student had been corrected earlier on, they could have been more successful at some of those mistakes. Number three, we're trying to connect intelligence with language learning ability. Well, we're always trying to identify what makes a good language learner, what makes someone good at learning foreign languages. Why do they have this knack for it? Do they have a good memory? Are they very logical type thinkers or analytical? And we see a real variety of people learn foreign languages well. Some of them are the students who tend to do well in other classes, and then some of them are students who don't tend to do well in all the traditional academic type classes. So we see kind of success at different levels, and which is good. It's kind of like language classes, it kind of levels the playing field so that you could have a lot of different students find success. Of course, it's frustrating for a student who's successful in most of their other classes, but then they just can't seem to learn a foreign language. They can be frustrated, but otherwise it does kind of level the playing field. And there's just so many skills involved with language, so many communication skills. It's not just measured by like an IQ test, or it's not just connected to mathematical ability or even memory. Number four, talking about how important motivation is, and that motivation is like the key to learning. And yes, I think that's really important. Motivation, have the energy to want to learn, you feel like you're really going to use this or need it, and you think of an unmotivated student that you think they're not really going to get too far. But this kind of breaks down when you have a student who is very motivated, wants to learn it, wants to work hard, and they can't. So that shows you like it's not all motivation. There are other factors involved in language learning in terms of the student's ability to kind of acquire this language. As teachers, we are partly responsible for motivating our students by just making the class interesting and relevant and having a lot of participation. Number five, this is the earlier is better argument, which I think it's better to really say, to really think, like, what is the best age to start introducing a foreign language to a kid who's learning their first language the normal way. And, how young is too young, kind of. And, of course, a lot of people are concerned if a child, is 2 years old and 3 years old and even up to like 4 or 5, they're really just learning their first language still. So people are concerned that introducing a second language will kind of slow down the first language, which sometimes it kind of does. Like if a kid at 4 is learning 2 languages, sometimes they will fall a little bit behind or kind of mix the languages, but pretty soon it becomes really like a win-win situation where once they become bilingual, they have all these advantages of being able to handle 2 languages, and learning a second language doesn't limit the first language ability, and it just improves the overall education of the child. And they talked about maybe 6 or 7-year-olds starting to learn language, but then they also said like a 10-year-old could easily catch up with a kid who started learning at 6 or 7. So the 10-year-old pretty soon can catch up. In my experience, when kids are real young, sometimes they don't see the purpose of learning a foreign language. They like the songs, they like the cultural things, they think it's kind of interesting, like counting to 10, but they're just trying to understand the world still, and it's kind of hard to see like how learning a foreign language is going to help them sometimes. But yeah, I think the kids should definitely start young, and I like the idea of introducing foreign languages into curriculum at that 6, 7, 8 years old. And then definitely by junior high and high school, when we do introduce foreign languages, yes, like we've gone into adolescence at that point, so we know that it's going to be harder. Even college, some people say that a lot of students don't really get serious about learning foreign languages until college, because in college it becomes like an elective for you or an option, Whereas in high school, you were forced to do this mandatory German, French, Spanish type class. And for a lot of different reasons, those don't really have a high success rate. But in college, you'll find people will often really kind of jump into it, study abroad. And then think about, at that point, you're 18 years old, 19 years old. You've kind of missed like those earlier sort of critical period hypothesis windows. And number 6, that most errors are from interference. And no, like we believe most of your errors are actually intralingual with an A, meaning the same type of errors that the native speaker makes when they're learning their first language. And like for example, he walks. If you say he walk, that's not interlingual, it's just intralingual. Or if you say like one mouse, two mice. I mean, if you say two mouses, that's not interlingual. All those irregular plurals. And so most errors we find just come from as a student learns the new system. And it's kind of a false idea that like all these errors are interlingual. Pronunciation, though, is interlingual. Like when a person makes pronunciation errors and they have this sort of foreign accent, yes, we could tell what country they're from, usually by their errors, by their accent, quote-unquote accent. So yeah, that would be interlingual. But in terms of vocabulary and even like sentence structure, it tends to be more intralingual. Number 7, reading improves vocabulary. Yes, I mean, we all believe in reading. Simplified novels, news, ESL news, which is a simplified, modified type of input. Getting students to read, just like when we learn our first language, our teachers are always telling us that like the key to vocabulary development is reading. Well, we could add also listening, because that's the oral input as well. And guessing the meaning from context. As you read, you see a new word, you guess the meaning from context. And then finally, number 8, in terms of learning to pronounce all these sounds, we think of learning a foreign language and learning how to say, sh and f and t. But also, what's often overlooked is the stress, which syllable to stress, and the intonation of the whole sentence, going up at the end, going down at the end, and having all the tone right. And that's, actually becomes sometimes really more important even than just getting like the individual sounds right. Also, there's a lot of dialects of English, and we don't really have a standard dialect, unless you say, the Queen's English would be maybe considered a standard in England. And then in the U.S., we don't have a standard dialect, except for a lot of people think the Western U.S. is considered more standardized, because the Eastern and Southern and Northeast, because they've had more history, tend to have their own sort of pronunciation. Boston, New York, the South. And so, but it does get tricky because, around the world you have all these world Englishes. And so when we teach pronunciation, like when I teach pronunciation, I can really only model for you kind of California pronunciation. Okay, that's the end of the first video, and then the second video will cover points 9 to 18.